Hi, everyone. Welcome to What Happens After Oops, How to Respond If Your Business Becomes the Victim of a Cyber Attack. This webinar is hosted by Windermere Insurance, Proactive IT, and the Hanover Insurance Group. The topic of today's conversation is cyber insurance and how your business should respond after a security incident. And today we're joined by a three-person panel. The first expert I want to introduce you to today is David Short. David is Executive Vice President of Windermere Insurance Group, and he has over 30 years of insurance experience. Some of his specialties include risk management, mergers and acquisitions, private equity, and professional liability. If you have questions for David after this session, you can contact him at dshort@windinsgroup.com or 704-247-3018. We're also joined by Steve Kennen. Steve is a cybersecurity and compliance expert and the president of Proactive IT, a managed cybersecurity firm here in Charlotte. He's also a speaker and continuing education presenter. Recently, you might have seen him featured by the National Cybersecurity Alliance or the North Carolina Association of Women Attorneys. If you have questions for Steve after we're finished, you can always contact him at info@weareproactive.com or 704-464-3075 extension 3. And our final panelist today is Philip Pancoast, who is a cyber claims specialist. Philip is a national general adjuster for Hanover Insurance, and he has 30 years of claims handling experience, and he leads a dedicated 24/7 cyber response team. He serves a variety of market segments ranging from the legal sector to the manufacturing industry. And if you have questions for Philip after this session, you can always contact him at ppancoast@hanover.com. Before we dive in, there will be a question and answer session at the end, so do take notes if there's a question you'd like answered. Once our Q&A session opens, please type your questions into the chat and we will try to answer as many as we can. And now I'm going to turn this over to David and let him explain why we're holding this webinar.
Thank you, Lauren. First, I want to thank everyone who has joined us this afternoon. We hope this will be informative and insightful. Second, I want to thank our partners at Proactive IT and at Hanover for sharing their expertise and experiences. As Lauren noted, I'm with Windermere Insurance Group, an independent insurance agency in Charlotte. I'm responsible for sales growth and for market relationships. That is, I'm expected to know what our insurance carrier partners are insuring and their appetite for various risks. So specific to insuring against cyber liability and network security breaches, I'll be assisted today by Patrick O'Brien. Patrick supports the financial services team in our office and is our resident expert on cyber liability insurance. So Patrick, thank you for joining us as well. Windermere is also a business that has to manage its own cybersecurity. How do we as a business manage the risks of cyber liability and network security breaches? We'll bring some of that perspective as well, but in the interest of full transparency, I do want to let you know that Windermere is a client of Proactive IT and a significant trading partner of Hanover Insurance. Yes, Steve, I have my 1-800-HELP card right here next to my computer. So. As we have noted, October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and if you're like us, you have received multiple invitations to other webinars, so thank you for joining ours. In the last 30 to 60 days, I personally have received nearly 30 such invitations, and they come from insurance carriers, from wholesale insurance brokers, from trade associations. Each one of these webinars focuses on a theme of prevention. They'll include a law enforcement representative. Burns and Wilcox, for example, included a former British intelligence officer. Travelers included an FBI agent. This theme of prevention carried through with E4 Carolinas hosting energy executives talking about how they aim to reduce the risk and protect against threats. The law enforcement representative will present a list of statistics, some of which we have borrowed here. If we can, there we are. They'll go on to talk about ways to prevent such breaches. Yet the statistic that sticks with me the most is, despite all the prevention efforts that are introduced or implemented, half of you will experience at least one cyber breach or network security event in the next 12 months. Further, prevention is not a one and done solution. Threat actors evolve. Just on Monday of this week, the New York Times reported that Microsoft officials and cybersecurity experts had warned that the agency behind the SolarWinds hack had launched another campaign targeting US computer networks. And then today I read in Business Insurance, hackers for hire are now the biggest security threat. So again, they continue to evolve. I do want to focus on two of the stats that we have seen the most. First, 2 out of 5 small to medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, were impacted by ransomware in 2020. And those stats suggest that each event cost about $200,000, including lost business and downtime. Second, if you're required to notify your customers, and some industry segments require you to do so, if you notify your customers and employees that their personal identifiable information might have been accessed, the average cost per notification per Hanover Insurance is $48. So let's say you have 5,000 unique records in your system, and this could be customers, prospects, employees, former employees, applicants, etc. Then you could incur $240,000 of expenses just in notifications. And you'll note that one of the stats that we highlighted earlier had 80 million credentials that were available in the slip credential marketplace that was brought down by the federal government. So all of these other webinars were about prevention, yet their own stats suggest that half of you will experience some type of cyber event anyway, with costs exceeding $200,000. So an event happens. Oops, says the employee that clicked on the phishing link. Now what? So before we get into the meat of the webinar, let's address some housekeeping. If we could move to the next slide, Lauren. Throughout our conversation, you'll hear references to data or network security and cyber liability, and you may think these terms are interchangeable. From an insurance perspective, they're not. Network security is first-party exposure, and cyber liability is third-party exposure. So now you're sitting there going, great, David, thanks. That's like clear as mud. So let's look at a little bit of a glossary. First party, that's you. You're the insured in a contract. Coverage is for cost to repair your stuff. Your building, if for a property policy, your car for a auto physical damage policy, your computer equipment in the event of a bricking event, your data in the event of a ransomware or malware event. In terms of network security, this also includes notification costs. So the second party then is the insurance companies. All insurance contracts are between the first party, which is you, and the second party, which is the insurance company. So then we come to the third party. Well, that's everybody else. Coverage is for your alleged liability for injury or damage to a third party. And that could be customers, again, prospects, visitors, general public. Sometimes it includes employees, depending on the policy. Coverage typically includes legal expenses. So you may hear us refer to liability policies as retainer policies. That is, you pay an insurance premium to retain access to panel counsel and other experts like Philip, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. And these experts are chosen by the insurance carrier because of their expertise and their negotiated rates. So now if we get back to the meat of the webinar, again, you'll hear from Steve and from Philip. And while our timeline in this webinar is linear, their responses operate in parallel. So if you are a client of either Proactive IT or of Hanover Insurance or both, understand that they will have parallel response paths. They'll be operating, both are going at the same time. But let's begin with Steve. Steve?
Cool. Thanks, David. That was a pretty good, I learned something personally. What I learned was the difference between first party and third party in policies. So the difference between breach response policies and cyber liability policies, which all of my customers ask me about. So thank you for that very much. So our job obviously is very prevention focused until there's a breach. And ideally, what we'll do almost immediately is execute on our breach response plan that we've written together with you, our customer. So, a big part of being able to respond effectively is that breach response plan. I think Philip will share with you that that's a big part of the insurance carrier's response as well. We got to figure out what it needs to be so that we can execute on it efficiently. And so from an IT perspective, get out the breach response plan. And then we start trying to do the things to interrupt the breach, right? So the first thing we want to do is stop it from happening if it's happening, and prevent any further damage from happening. And so we'll do lots of fun things in our breach response, starting with making sure the backup server is still well protected and that your backups are viable, shutting down access to the network or the systems or the computers, taking things offline if it happens to be a breach where we notice exfiltration, and blocking any communications between the network and the internet so that anything that's going on ceases. The idea being stop it in its tracks as soon as we're aware that it's there, right? Once we've stopped it in its tracks, and this is all high level stuff, the next thing we need to do is get to the root cause, right? Where did it start and when did it start? And that's super important because you can't recover to a point prior to the attack unless you can identify exactly when and where it started, right? So from an IT perspective, we're extremely interested in identifying the root cause. What system was ground zero? How far did it spread? So that we can come up with the plan to recover the systems. And there are a lot of things that we have to do that, combing through logs, looking at notifications and alerts, that kind of thing, doing some hands-on investigation, sometimes looking at the servers, looking at the computers on the network to identify where the problem happened. Bearing in mind that this entire time, if you're a Hanover customer, Philip and his team are also working in parallel and oftentimes working with us to put together and execute on these plans. And from a high level, once we understand the root cause and where it started, sorry, Lauren, if you could just pop back to that prior slide, please. I hadn't finished with that one yet. Thank you. Yep, there it is. Once we've identified ground zero, then we can recover the network. And we have, with our customers, we have a lot of tools in place that make this recovery process extremely fast and efficient, but only after we understand where it started so that we can recover back to a point in time prior to there having been a breach on the network. And there are a lot of details around that, but at the end of the day, the right tools managed in the right ways allow us to do very, very quick recovery of our customers' networks and servers. And that includes the PCs and the servers and the firewall and all of those things. But I think from a high level, the most important thing to recovering well and effectively is having that breach response plan in place, right? Before you get attacked, and think it through. And one of the things we're extremely partial to doing is doing what we call a tabletop exercise with that. Write it, but then periodically test it, right? So just like you might want to test your backups periodically to make sure that you're going to be able to recover the way you think you're going to be able to recover, it's good to put the people who are responsible for incident response together around a table and invent an incident. Hey, there's been a cyber attack. Hey, there's been a hardware failure. Hey, something has happened. How are we going to respond? And then walk through it with the team. Because it's in walking through it that you'll identify the things that you missed the first time you wrote the plan. And you'll be able to make sure that your plan is as thorough as possible. And then the last slide, Lauren, is when you're done with an incident like this from an IT perspective, you need to do, right, a post-mortem. What happened? Why did it happen? And how can we improve our incident response the next time around? So it sounds simple, but it's a lot. It's a lot of planning. And then the planning is what allows you to respond pretty effectively. So, that's my first salvo in the conversation. Is that good, David? Does that get you where we need to be?
I believe so. Thank you, Steve.
Cool, thanks.
At this point, we'd like to bring in Philip into the conversation and allow him to give his perspective from the claims side. And Philip, I know with your background, you have much experience in this area. And so we're going to turn this over to you so that you can explain it not from just a technical perspective, as Steve has explained, but what is happening on the insurance end.
Thanks very much, Lauren. So I'm going to piggyback on something Steve pointed out, which is having a business continuity plan, an incident response plan of your own. And it's the functional equivalent, I think, Steve, of a fire drill.
Heck yeah.
I can remember kindergarten and everybody lining up and getting ready to test the plan that would get the children out of the school. And I think I did it all the way through high school. And this probably is much more elaborate than that, but nothing more than that. We know that these things can occur, and let's be prepared for them when they do occur. David, thanks very much for the statistics. It's a keen reminder of a couple of things, not the least of which is the statistics really shouldn't be there to scare us, but they should be there to remind us that what is going on in this space, whether it's social engineering or ransomware attacks or data breaches, is accelerating at an accelerating rate. So if we saw 100 of these 5 years ago, and 300 4 years ago, and 800 2 years ago, that's what's happening in this space. And so the threat actors know no bounds, and preparing for them is similar to getting ready for any weather event. If you think that it's going to be a tropical storm, you pull the chairs in, you take the umbrella down, you cut off a low-hanging limbs and clap your hands and call it good. If you think it's going to be a Cat 1, you probably made a trip to Home Depot, boarded up the windows, moved everything out of the way, put the pets in the car, and started your process of evacuation. And so the statistics may guide you in evaluating how you look at your cyber house. And when you look at it, you and somebody like Steve and his group are going to be able to make an assessment of whether or not that's a house of straw or a house of bricks. And so when the weather comes, hopefully you're going to be well prepared with a plan in place for business continuity, because your most important task is getting up and getting operational again and doing what you're doing. And Steve's group and a cybersecurity group can help you prepare for that. And David's group can help put together a package that allows you to access professionals on retainer to address your problems. And so at a very high level, when you find yourself in a situation where you've been breached and your data is corrupted and probably has been stolen, you're going to need professionals like incident response, forensics, breach coach, restoration assistance if you can't do it on your own or you don't have somebody to do it, data mining and data recovery. These are all things that, as David pointed out earlier, your insurer has already formed relationships that are cost effective with professionals who are prepared to literally hit the ground running. and help you, first and foremost, restore your operations. Okay. Effectively address data security so that you don't have to worry about persistence. Okay. So there's a tool looking at your environment to make sure that something's not going to come back up again. Or if something does come back up again in the way of malware, it can be addressed and extinguished. Okay. Collect the forensic data and get you back up and running and evaluate whether or not you've had a data exfiltration. So when and if this happens to you, and again, it's not going to happen to anybody, based on what David told us, half of you probably aren't going to have a problem. The other half are. David, I'm not sure that you were able to tell us which half that's going to be.
Not today.
So part of putting the plan together means being prepared with the professionals on retainer and having a contingency plan. And so I'm here to tell you what the back end of that looks like. So that contingency plan, that business interruption plan, should include a plan for engaging your insurer immediately. I'm here 24/7. I take calls at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we're working and effectively moving forward with the solution in somewhere between 2 and 4 hours, which means that your best opportunity to work towards operational restoration is to pull out your incident response plan, your business continuity plan, and call your insurer so that your insurer can get to work on assembling the professionals necessary to get you operational, to find out what happened, okay, to collect all that evidence and to evaluate it, and to respond to the threat actor, because that threat actor is going to do a couple of different things. They're going to encrypt your system, which means you can't use it. And before they encrypted your system, they will have stolen your data. It doesn't happen every time. The theft of data probably only happens about 70% of the time. But it allows that threat actor to hit you twice. If you want to restore your operations and have your data back, you have to get a decryptor from us. If you don't want us to sell the data that we stole from you, you have to pay for that too. Criminals evolve. So your visits with David and Steve are not one and dones, and they never should be, because these criminals behave just like car thieves. Okay, locks prevented car thieves for a while. The club prevented car thieves for a while. LoJack prevented car thieves for a while. But car thieves are in the business of stealing cars, and cyber criminals are in the business of extorting money. And any obstacles you put in their way, they're going to spend a fair amount of time trying to get around. So updating that plan, that business continuity plan, and visiting with your cybersecurity professionals periodically is critically important. And understanding what your exposure looks like as you evolve as a business is also critically important. There are a couple of examples I just want to go through really quickly with you. And if I reach the point where I'm using up too much time, folks, please jump in and interrupt me. So this, I think, was a Saturday at around 7 p.m. call. Hanover's Insured was a small law practice on the other side of the country who found themselves to be encrypted, found a ransom note, and there was a claim that the threat actor in that case had exfiltrated their data. You can imagine the sorts of data that a law firm might have stored on its server, and how important it is to the law firm's clients. So this was a pretty dramatic event. One, they couldn't get to their data, and two, they may have found themselves in a situation where they had to tell everybody about this, which can't possibly have been good for their reputation. The most unfortunate thing was they probably hadn't thought a lot about the exposure and the coverage available that they had purchased and decided to purchase was not anywhere near the $200,000 average expense that they could anticipate. They only had $10,000 in coverage. It didn't make any difference. Hanover put together a plan, assembled professionals, worked with the insured to understand exactly what had happened, and the professionals went to work. We actually did negotiate a very small ransom payment in that case, got them restored, got their data back, and I've received no less than 3 calls from the partners in that firm who have said it was the best money that we ever spent, even though it was out of our own pocket. And I also know that after that event, and this is Stephen and David, I'll count on you to back me up on this. Anybody who has had a cyber event understands 2 things. They understand the importance of being prepared and having a plan, and they understand the value of having insurance so that there are professionals on retainer that they can access in the moment that they need them.
Hey, Philip, you mind if I jump in on your anecdote for a quick second?
Please.
This just raises a two huge points I want to communicate to everybody who's participating. The first is I see that this firm had no viable backups in a small IT environment, right? And so I don't know how many years ago this event happened, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but companies like Hanover and other insurers who were writing policies back then weren't asking a lot of questions. And what I'm seeing today is a big change from that. And it's because of these kinds of losses, right? What we're seeing today is insurance applications are asking questions about backup and recoverability and whether or not, you have a business continuity plan that includes effective backups and the ability to recover from a lot of different scenarios. And the reason I say that is, in my world, not having viable backups is impossible. So, I wonder who it was that was supporting this small IT environment that left a company in a situation where their backups could be destroyed by the same attack that destroyed their operational data, right? And so I think what I want to say is that you're unlikely to be in this situation in the future because your insurer is not going to insure you if you don't have a good business continuity plan, right? Right.
And yeah, and to your point, it's interesting. So every small business has to make decisions about how to use their resources.
Yes.
There may have been a laundry list of recommendations from an effective IT provider that somebody went down the laundry list and checked the boxes that they decided were most important to spend their resources on.
Yeah.
Like again, part of it is sitting down with a professional and walking through what your exposures are, what your needs are, and what the impact to your business is. If I'm down for 2 weeks, what does that mean?
But hey, David, I'm not off base on this, right? The carriers are now requiring a lot of these things just as a starting point for being insured.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think it's very telling that you're the one to address the questions on the application, because frankly, that's what we're seeing when we go to a client and say, okay, here's the cyber application that we need you to complete, and they're turning either to their in-house IT folks or to you as their outsourced provider and say, hey, I need you to answer, questions 8 through 14 on here because I really don't know what this is, but I think we have it. And so, I think your story there just speaks to the fact that, you're probably filling out as many of these applications on behalf of your clients, as the clients are themselves. But it goes to the other point, and Patrick and I were talking about this the other day, the amount of information that insurance carriers are asking for in the applications is evolving. And to piggyback on Philip's anecdote or analogy, not too many insurance companies want to insure straw houses anymore. They're really looking for the brick houses. They might take a few twig houses if there is a plan to upgrade to brick houses, but they're asking a lot of questions.
Laura, could you just flip to the next slide? Because I want to leverage something that Steve pointed out. Different claim, different account, different sort of situation. In this particular case, again, we have a malware attack where the data is encrypted and there's a claim of data exfiltration and theft of data. Interestingly enough, without going too far into the technical area, there were two backups in this environment, one which had been decommissioned but was still intact, and another which was newer. And the threat actor had deleted the most recent backup. And they did that simply because, as a security measure, the business had encrypted their data, which meant that if anybody stole it, it was useless to them. Okay, they couldn't do anything with it, but they deleted the data. And so we went out and identified somebody who works specifically in the area of recovering deleted files and discovered that the threat actor hadn't done a very good job of it. And were able to restore the data to 2 days before the event occurred. Again, critically important because it gives you power if you ever have to consider paying a ransom, which in this case, it doesn't look like that will ever happen.
It's such an interesting anecdote, Philip, because the idea that the threat actors will come in and try to sabotage things, right? So there's the exfiltration attack, which is they want to steal the data, but you could be doing some responsible things like using encryption to make the data unstealable. But there are other things they can do to try to extort money from you and trying to damage your backups so that maybe you have older backups you can recover from, but how much data can you afford to lose, right? So if they can damage the last week of backups, right? At some point, they can make the pain of recovery so significant that perhaps you need to pay the ransom anyway. And so this is how they're operating, right? They're looking to leverage you wherever they can possibly leverage you.
And again, because of the amount of time we have, there's some slides that are included that we may not have touched on in great detail, but it's important for anybody who either has been through or may go through a ransomware event to understand that these folks are criminals, okay? They will do whatever it takes, say whatever they believe will impact a favorable result in their extortion attempt. And so I would direct you to the slide that captures that, but I won't spend a lot of time walking you through the sorts of conduct that we see from criminals, but you've seen it all on television.
Philip, I'm happy to go back to that slide if you want to go over some of the typical behavior. And then maybe after that, we can dive into the Q&A session.
Sure.
Here we go. I think this is the behaviors you were referring to.
Yeah, this is a great slide.
So when you see that your system has been impacted by a malware variant, that's the first time that you know that anybody has been in your system. In my experience, and Steve and David and Patrick, feel free to jump in. In my experience, they've probably been in your system for somewhat greater period of time, usually 10 days to even months before they've deployed the malware. And the reason is that the malware, the notice that you have a problem, only occurs after they've had a chance to investigate your environment and to exfiltrate, fancy word for steal, data. And so that's when you first see it, but rest assured that in virtually all cases, they've already been in your environment, they've explored your environment, they may have looked at your insurance policy if you saved it on your server. And they may know what cyber coverage you have. Again, just something to think about. And they've collected information on your business operations. And if you've kept accounting records in there or balance sheets in there, they're making an assessment of your ability, what they believe your ability to pay is. They will use both encryption and data exfiltration to extort. They will tell you not to notify anybody. It's a secret. They don't want anybody else interfering and they don't want professionals involved. If they aren't successful, they'll start harassing you. And when I say harassing you, they'll call you. They will call you, they will threaten you, they'll call your CFO, your president, your CEO, your chief technology officer. And if they don't get a response, they may even call your employees. They understand how to create pressure, okay? I've seen threat actors intrude on a Zoom meeting held at a company. It was quickly disconnected because the person in charge of the meeting knew what was going on. They will do whatever it takes to pressure you into making a payment to them, including putting you on a clock, including publishing some nominal amount of data on the dark web. This is why it's important to have professionals involved.
So, Philip and David, oh, my sound is not working well. Sorry, let me mute this and see if I can fix it.
Can't hear you, Steve.
Let's see if this is any better.
Yes.
We good?
Much. Thank you.
All right. So one of the questions I get from my clients a lot, and I think it would be great if you can help me answer it properly. And I'll kind of start to answer it, and then you can tell me how I have it wrong. But they always ask, what kind of coverage do I need and why do I need it? And so, I want to tie this back to what you were talking about earlier, which is first party and third party risks. Because I think, and I'm going to look for you to correct me, that that's where a lot of it comes down, right? There's a bunch that goes on, but someone needs to identify what their risks are and what the cost of those risks would be if they weren't mitigated with insurance or technology. So for example, responding to a breach is first party, right? So that's things like recovering from the breach and doing breach notifications, if those are required by your industry or by your government. And then there's the third party ones, which are, what do you do if your breach gets you sued, is the way I think about it. And maybe you can elaborate that on some more. And if my experience looking at my customers' policies is true, different policies do different things to a different extent. So it's important to think about both of those dimensions when you're talking to whomever is going to guide you through dealing with the insurance part of this. Is that fair? David, you're the broker. Maybe you can kind of talk about how you see those issues and how you advise on them with your clients.
I'll lean on Patrick a little bit here as well.
All right, cool.
As far as how the policy is structured and some of the things that we look at. Patrick, you're still on mute.
Is that better?
Yes, sir.
There he is.
There I am. So the question specifically is around, sort of first and third party coverages.
Yeah, so who needs which and why, I guess. And is there anything more to it besides just those two dimensions?
Yeah, well, there certainly is. There's a host of different things that Windermere can help structure for you inside of a commercial crime policy. There's the first and third party coverages that we've talked about a lot here already, like ransomware payments. A lot of times you'll have a situation, and a lot of times it's not even just the demand isn't in U.S. dollars. Sometimes they'll demand that you pay them $75,000 worth of Bitcoin, and they need it by tomorrow. And most cyber policies have language in them that will pay out in cryptocurrency. So there's things that you don't even think about in the normal course of doing business that a cyber policy can address. So outside of just that ransomware type exposure, we can also help you structure a policy that addresses some of the cyber crime aspects like social engineering, fraudulent instruction, things like that. And those are often sublimited, as you've mentioned. So if you have $1 million worth of ransomware coverage, oftentimes the insurance company will sublimit different coverages underneath that so that they're not the full $1 million limit, sort of as you were alluding to. So in terms of social engineering, a lot of times what we're seeing is that is being sublimited to $250,000 on these $1 million policies. But really, this kind of just highlights the importance of having a broker, someone who can advocate on your behalf in the marketplace when going out to get these types of quotes. So I think it's really important, to kind of have a conversation with your broker about, hey, we don't really know anything about cyber. Can we get some quotes and just see what that looks like? And I think that's kind of a first step as well to kind of figure out exactly what each individual business needs, because we can structure policies to address different industries and what are the exposures for them based on their operations.
So let me ask you a few specific questions, Patrick. Is it possible to get a first party policy with no third party coverage?
Yes.
Okay. Is it possible to get a third party policy with no first party coverage? So in short, can you get a policy that doesn't help you pay for a response, but does help you pay for getting sued?
I haven't seen that.
Okay. So typically it's
Steve, in some cases, insurance carriers will throw in or attach certain endorsements to different lines of coverage in a package policy, for example. You might have as part of either your property policy or your crime policy a throw in for data breach events, and it might be $10,000 to $15,000. Then conversely, on the liability policy, they might throw in cyber liability for another $10,000 or $15,000. These look nice in that, hey, we're getting a little bit of coverage, but I think as we've illustrated here and that we've talked about, the devil's in the details, and these policies are not going to really respond in the way that you think they are, nor are the limits going to be adequate enough to really protect you and protect your business. I think there was a stat that we had in there that 60% of companies that have a ransomware event without insurance are out of business in 12 months. Again, we're trying to protect your business and making sure that the coverage is robust. Now, I will say, this is not like property insurance that your lender says you have to have, or work comp where the state says you have to have it, or auto where the state says you have to have financial responsibility, or D&O where your investors say you have to have it. This is a discretionary purchase, right? So
today
it's discretionary.
Yeah.
If you're in the financial services sector, maybe it's not discretionary, but it is still a discretionary purchase, and that's where Patrick and I will have more conversations with clients about what do these different sublimits mean? Do I need media liability? Do I need to have incident response built into the coverage form? Those different things. If is it a throw in? for the policy, or is it something that if we took it off, am I going to get some notable savings?
So you're totally driving to exactly what I was getting at,
Mhm.
which is there's no such thing, folks, as one size fits all cyber insurance, right? And, if you use Philip's examples of clients that had problems, right? If you're a small law firm and you've chosen not to invest a lot of money on the preventative side of technology because you don't believe that there are significant risks there, then you may need more robust insurance coverage to be there for you to help your response to a breach be more effective, right? So you really have to look at all the different risks and perils and what they could mean to your business from a financial perspective, right? I mean, it's not just recovering your business, but it's notifying potentially notifying your clients. Maybe there's a dimension of brand or reputation on the line here. There's certainly the possibility of getting sued by somebody else whose business was damaged because your business was damaged.
I think where the points too, Steve, and you're kind of nipping at it just a little bit, is cyber impacts any business regardless of your industry segment. How you want to respond from an insurance coverage or insurance protection standpoint might depend on are you doing business online? Are you taking online mail orders? Are you accepting credit cards? Do you have a PCI plan? How critical is your data? A law firm versus maybe manufacturing, maybe the data is not quite as critical. That doesn't mean that your customers and employees don't think that their own personal identifiable information is as critical as the next person. So again, there's some variability based on what it is that an insured does, but there's no variability on the standpoint that everybody's at risk.
Yeah.
Can I butt in here real quick? And I just want to let the audience know that the Q&A is now open. So if you have questions, please enter that into the Q&A form there, and we will try to relay them to the panelists.
Thank you, Lauren.
I know that one thing that may be on people's minds, we talked about, you have these parallel paths. You have the security side and you also have the insurance side. If a business owner is trying to prioritize how they go about mitigating their risk, one question they may have is, should we pursue the insurance first and then the IT solution second? What aspect should we address first? So David and Steve, I'd like to turn that over to you both and have you address that.
I was going to let Philip jump in. He looks like he's jumping through the camera. Come on. You're muted,
Philip. You're muted, Philip. Philip, you're muted.
Thanks very much. Sorry, I just wanted to make one really quick point, which I think will feed into both David and Steve's responses, is that Patrick and David both pointed out that applications are becoming more robust and more refined, and they drive behavior. So I'm not sure that it's one solution or the other, because they're now being pushed together by how the market is behaving, as opposed to, I'll get insurance because I understand that I have a risk, but the moment you go into the marketplace, your insurer is reasonably going to ask, okay, so what's in place? What have you done? And Steve, I'm going to land this in your lap first. The three spaces where we see opportunities are in gapped backups, effectively gapped backups, identifying and securing critical data, and cyber hygiene. And so now I'm going to leave it with Steve and David.
Yeah, and so what's interesting, Philip, and full disclosure, Hanover is not the only application I've seen this year. I've seen 6 or 8 different ones from different carriers, and some are being more stringent than others. But they all have something in common, which is the insurers are getting smart about what actually mitigates risks. And therefore, they're starting to demand that, because that's how they drive down their losses, right? Because they're in business to protect you, but also to make money. And so 100%, right? What's really important about backups is, and I'll just use a quick anecdote. lots of people use USB drives to back up their servers and then they take them off site. Well, if a USB drive is plugged into a server in your business and that server gets encrypted, what do you think is going to happen to the USB drive with the backups on it, right? So that's what Philip means about gapped. The backups need to be isolated from the operational systems, at least effectively isolated, so that they're not at risk in the same way that the operational systems are in a breach. So 100%, right? Really, really, really solid backup methodologies at least allows you to recover more effectively and diminish the probability that you or your insurer would have to create a cyber payment to bring your company back. So 100% agree. The second one or the third one you mentioned, cyber hygiene. I mean, that's what my business is. It's a cyber hygiene business and has been for 15 years. Although, you know, we can call it that now, but that's just how you stop being the low hanging fruit, right? You don't have to run faster than the bear to escape the bear. You just have to run faster than the slowest person in the group, right? So, you know, so if you're doing cyber hygiene, you won't be the low hanging fruit that the bad guys are most likely to find and compromise. It increases the probability that you aren't the unlucky one, right? And then the third one, Philip, I think you said was the data, right? And so if you have valuable data that they can steal from you and use that to extort money from you, that example of the company whose data was in an encrypted database and wasn't accessible to the hackers, even though they had breached the network, is a really great example, right? Making sure that the vulnerable information is as protected as possible is critical to preventing your business from being extorted in the event that the network gets breached. And the last point I'll make on that is, look, we're really good at prevention. That's what IT companies do for the most part. And my company's gotten good at helping plan that response so that if there is a breach, the recovery time can be compressed and the cost of recovery can be compressed. But at the end of the day, there isn't a lot that a technology company can do to prevent a really dedicated human being from screwing up and allowing the breach in the first place. And so even really, really effective IT can fail. And if it does, you want to make sure that you've got the resources at your disposal to recover. And that's why I think, you know, I would agree 100% that technology and insurance are 2 pages in the same recovery book, right?
I'll answer Lauren's question real quickly from an insurance perspective. Patrick and I want to sell you an insurance policy. That's what we do. But I'm not going to be able to sell you an insurance policy if you don't have good IT hygiene. So if you have to spend one or the other, it's going to pain me to say this, go with the IT hygiene, and then we'll try to get you a good cyber policy.
Right, and we're going through this with a customer right now. We're actually interacting with the carrier and the CTO, figuring out which hygiene will actually lower premiums, right? Where's the sweet spot? And I don't have an answer to that yet, but I know it's coming because that's what people want to know. How much do I need to spend on IT to make sure that I have the risk, the coverage, the insurance coverage that I need without overspending on IT, right? You don't need to buy a Maybach IT system to get insurance, but maybe you need that Toyota Camry. And how do you define that? And how does the insurer define that? Right, Philip?
Right. Hey, David and Patrick, are you seeing questions around, and I'm going to use hygiene with regard to social engineering? So, you know, the tricksters out there who send you an email that looks like it's really correct and says, hey, would you wire money to this account because I'm no longer taking paper checks? Are you seeing questions in that space also?
Callback protocols are required. Two-factor authentication was probably pressed by one of your competitors a year and a half ago, is now becoming industry standard. So we're starting to see those types of activities that are required. And the underwriting is getting to a point where no responses are just take that application, just throw that one in the trash can and we'll move on. So we have to be more thoughtful, you know, about how we're responding to questions and the like. Lauren, were there any other questions? We batted that one around pretty well.
Well, I know that we had some discussion points prepared, and another one of those, and I think this is pertinent. What does a cyber insurance policy cost right now? And I know that that's, like Steve was saying, there's no one size fits all. So I think that might be, an interesting question to answer.
Sure, I can take that one, Lauren. It's going to kind of depend. So it's hard to say, exactly what it's going to cost for, for a given business. It's obviously going to go through an underwriting process. But I think it might be helpful to just give, a few examples of people that clients we've interacted with, and what their current, cyber policies cost to sort of frame it. So while they've certainly gone up in the last 18 months, and I think everyone's, there's been a lot of headlines about cyber, a lot of carriers are retrenching, we still find it to be a pretty, affordable coverage for that sort of, balance sheet protection for businesses. So, one that comes to mind, we have a company here locally in Charlotte, they're retail. They do about $20 million in sales. They have, I think, around 175 employees. And for a $2 million, first and third party insurance policy, that costs them under $7,000 a year annually. So, I think that that's good to kind of put into perspective that, for a company that's doing that much in revenue, to have this kind of protection for a potential, $1 million loss, at under $7K annually, I think that's kind of helpful for people to hear. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I work with a lot of financial services groups that are, in the custody of hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on behalf of their clients. So there's definitely, a huge exposure for them there. And, we routinely are able to place those types of policies that address social engineering, fraudulent, instruction, ransomware, all of those coverages. We're finding that pretty consistently we're still able to place that insurance for them for, $4,000 or $5,000 annually. So when you put into context what one of these events can cost you, obviously the rates are going up, but I still think it's definitely, at least worth, exploring for really any type of business, as I gave, two different industries there.
Yeah, and Patrick, I'll contribute to that because I'm a business owner and I have insurance and it's carried by Hanover, which I didn't actually know until after we all came together. And, my insurance is about $4,000 a year currently, up from $1,200 the year before.
Right.
And I think that's what's going on right now is the insurance industry has figured out that the losses are happening pretty significantly. And the reason they're happening is because of how many companies are actually getting breached. And I think this misconception that small businesses have that they're not at risk is really dangerous because a very large number of small businesses are getting breached and suffering losses.
Yeah.
Right.
We see a fair amount of activity in what I would describe as the small business Main Street America, single or 2 or 3 storefront shops. Everybody is a target. The ransomware cyber criminal business is a cottage business. It's easy to get into, and it's fairly easy to make money in.
This is their, full-time job. We wake up and go to our jobs every day to, provide for our families. These cyber criminals wake up every day and, have the goal to, steal money. So that's, how they're, making a life for themselves. So it is a full-time job for them.
I don't know if you can read this headline. It says crime and no punishment. Impunity breeds innovation and aggression. So just to that very point. So it's one of the multiple reports that we've read in preparation for our webinar today. So
Lauren, could you let everybody know how they can get access to the slides? Because I saw that question come in and I know we're out of time. So let's finish up with that maybe.
Sure. So I know that for each of you who registered, we do have your email because you registered with your email and received your invite link through there. So what we can do is sometime this week after the webinar is finished, we can send you the slide deck so that you're able to go over the information that we covered today. And if you have further questions, you'll have the contact information of each of the panelists here, and you can, shoot your questions directly to them. They'll be more than happy to provide you the answers that you need or point you in the right direction.
Great. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't mind sticking around for 5 or 10 minutes, which I'll do to answer questions if any come through. Otherwise, we're at 3 o'clock, so I guess it's witching hour.
It's pub time in London.
Okay, and if we don't see any questions come through the chat, then we will end the session. And once again, feel free to reach out to the panelists directly. And just take some notes of whatever comes to mind. You might have a question that occurs to you later and not right now, after you've had a chance to think about what the information that we've covered today.
Yeah, and thank you all very much for participating. I really appreciate you making time, and hopefully it provided some value for you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you participating.
Okay, we will wrap it up here. Steve, if you will end our meeting, that'd be great.
All right, ending the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Philip.